Hello, all. Welcome back to the weekly portion review. I'm sorry that last week we were not available. You'll have to excuse us since we're amidst a war. Having said that, I'm pleased to announce that we finished the book of Exodus and we are now entering the book of Vayikra, and you call it out, or the book of Leviticus, right? And when we transition to this book, right, the Torah is really shifts its focus dramatically, right? From if Genesis and Exodus, we were having these sweeping narratives of creation and exile and redemption. Now we move towards a world of structure and more detail and more sanctity, and like the last few portions we're building up to this. And it's really not a story driven book. It's more about a book of proximity, right? And it's really asking a single central question: what does it mean for a human being to live in the presence of Hashem, in the presence of the divine? And at the heart of this question, there is a new figure. There is the Kohen, the priest, right, who becomes a primary bridge between, or an intermediary between heaven and earth. And the Kohen is not just he's not just there for a ritual function. He really embodies a vision of the elevated human existence. And we'll get into that, but it's really meant to guide towards the whole nation towards holiness. But the moment we introduce such a figure, obviously there's an unavoidable tension that also emerges. And if we create a class of spiritual leaders who operates above the ordinary life, and who we're honoring and we're giving them authority, and there's a distance from them to us, we have to ask, is this structure actually stable, or is it inherently dangerous? Like we saw in later periods in Jewish history, there were priests who betrayed, right, their sacred role. And the Torah's answer is not to eliminate this institution, but is really to design it carefully. Now, the structure of the Israeli society was intentionally crafted so that the Kohen, like we said, could exist somewhat removed from the pressures of ordinary life, right? So the Kohen doesn't carry the burden of earning a livelihood, right, where he's supported by the people, and he doesn't have any contact with death, right? He has to make sure he stays pure, and he's also shielded in a certain sense from some personal crisis, right? He can't marry a divorced woman, so there's in a sense the Kohen lives a different existential sphere, yeah, and one that really allows him to see life from above, hopefully with clarity and distance. And precisely because of this distance, he's able to then serve those of us who have fallen, to guide us, to elevate us, and to connect us back to holiness. But like we said, the system depends on this fragile condition that the Kohen has to remain true to his elevated calling. Right, the moment the priesthood becomes transactional, right, when it is required through money or power or self-interest, then it starts to collapse from within. And like we said, we saw this in our history, that it was corrupted, and ultimately it ensured the destruction of this institution. And a system, but it's really not a single role, right? The Torah never intended the Kohen to stand alone, right? It was a idea in a healthy Jewish society. We have to have a balance of multiple forces, or separation of power, so to speak. We had the Kohen, right, the priesthood, which represents, like we said, the holiness, the transcendence. We have the kingship, right, the monarchy, which is representing the governance and the power, and also the national structure. We had the Sanhedrin, right, which is the judicial authority that we have, which also representing law and wisdom and also intellectual clarity. And we also had the prophet, who is he's more of like an anarchist in a certain sense. He's there to flatten things when things get out of control. But together, they form a complete architecture of leadership. Now, throughout Jewish history, these forces obviously were not in a perfect balance. Rarely they were in a perfect balance. And at times, one dominates the others, and that, like we said, leads toward a distortion. And too much power without holiness will lead to corruption, and too much spirituality without grounding leads us to detachment, like we see with Aaron's sons, and too much legalism without a vision leads also to stagnation, ultimately, or ossification. And so Jewish history is not static. It is an ongoing process of searching for this proper equilibrium. And alongside this imbalance, something even deeper occurred, right? There's the disappearance of prophecy from the Jewish consciousness as well. And as we talk about often in exile, the Jewish people lost not only our political sovereignty, but also our ability to live within a reality of open divine presence, right? The temple was gone, the national experience was fragmented, and the collective spiritual vision then shrank accordingly. And so Judaism becomes this concentrated around the private table of the individual Jew, and that's why the codex we have is called the Shulchan Aruch, the set table, right? So there's these beautiful and meaningful ideas, but they're inherently limited compared to the national or spiritual reality that once was. And therefore, the task before us today is not merely historical, but it's not even theoretical. It's actually, we have to reawaken within the Jewish people a longing for a restored world, a longing for a living temple, a house of prayer for all nations, a longing for a real functioning priesthood, and also a longing for holiness that's not abstract, right? It's embodied, it's continuous, it's even inherited. And a world in which really sanctity is not just something that we study or we talk about, but it's experienced, it's embodied as a living reality, right? It's participatory. And if we look honestly at the current state of Israel, politically, socially, and spiritually, we see something, I would say, striking, right? We are still living in this exact tension. We regained some sort of kingship of Malchut with the Jewish sovereignty and power, and we're working on some sort of legal system discourse over here, not a Sanhedrin, but there's an intellectual debate and ideological struggles, but the dimension of kihuna, right, of unified, elevated holiness remains obviously very fractured, and we, of course, don't have prophecy as well. And in our generation, when it's clear that we feel the absence of prophecy, even though we can't fully name it, this explains why the intensity of our current moment, right? That there's political divisions, there's like we said, ideological clashes, and a deep sense of something that essentially is still missing. And these are symptoms of a nation that has returned physically, but is still searching for a spiritual architecture. So for generations, we've spoken if we are in the middle of this process, but perhaps we need to start thinking of ourselves and being a little more daring. We're no longer at the beginning. We're not even at the middle. We are really approaching a point of decision, a stage where an imbalance can't actually sustain itself anymore. And we're at a stage where leadership has to refine itself in Israel. We must do this. And power has to reconnect to an actual purpose and a vision. And the spiritual gain, right? We have to have spirituality, has to become real again. And the question isn't whether we could rebuild these structures. The question is, will we be worthy for these structures when they actually return? Are we going to orient ourselves properly? And that's the work we have to be doing now. And this is true towards the Jewish people, and this is also true to the whole world. We must orient ourselves towards God so we can manifest His kingdom here. Shabbat Shalom.